this is what makes me optimistic, is that I don't believe that we can wait for everything to be okay to be happy. And I think people are getting that now. They're looking for the joy in the smaller things. They're looking for the joy in the moments. And I think that's a great lesson for us to be learning. So I'm really, really optimistic about that.
I'm Victor Purton. I run the Centre for Optimism, and I am one of the three amigos with Jenny and Noreen on Project Optimism. And our first project, as you know, was an animated course created during lockdown that takes between 50 minutes and a lifetime to learn the habits of an optimist. And our special guests today, Tane and Jay, it is such a privilege to have the two of you join us. So, as you know, I've written a fair amount of stuff on this question. You know, there's a lot of blame game about it. Why is the news so bad? You know, profit motives, all sorts of things. And then we see projects like my friend Judy Rogers in New York, who runs Images and Voices of Hope. We're seeing all sorts of positive news projects. But many of you know that my book of the last decade was John Hagel's The Power of Pull. My book of this decade is written by a Swedish doctor called Hans Rosling, called Factfulness. And Rosling says this: we have to understand why journalists have a distorted worldview. And the answer is because they are human beings just like us with dramatic instincts. And of course, their editors are even more dramatic. And Rosling, of course, if you read his book, goes on to understand, you know, if you look at life through the prism of negativity, you're going to miss the stories. And the other day, two Channel 7 journalists were tweeting to each other, and one said, "Oh, I covered a positive story today, but it feels like the first time in months." And it was literally the first time in months. So we understand this stuff. And Barry, who's online, and others who are very experienced in this space can talk about it more. As you know, the Centre for Optimism, the first question we always ask our guests is, what makes you optimistic? And so I'd like to throw firstly to my co-host, Noreen Mosley, to ask her what makes you optimistic, and to ask our other guests.
Sure, be delighted. So do you know what? As you know, I change my answers quite a bit, just depending on what I've absorbed in terms of an optimistic idea, I suppose. But I was just reflecting today, and this is what makes me optimistic, is that I don't believe that we can wait for everything to be okay to be happy. And I think people are getting that now. They're looking for the joy in the smaller things. They're looking for the joy in the moments. And I think that's a great lesson for us to be learning. So I'm really, really optimistic about that. That's me done. How about you, Tane? What makes you optimistic today?
What makes me optimistic is, well, if I can use Hans Rosling as an example, to a quote that I love from him. The world is getting better, but it is still not yet good enough. You have to hold these two ideas in your head at the same time. Because we have the technology, we've got the science, we've got the people, the human ingenuity, the kindness, the caring, the empathy. And what gives me optimism is the fact that we can do this. Now, the only issue that makes me slightly less optimistic is how are we going to do it, and how can we tune our news feeds, our information diets to activate people rather than, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so, having said that, I am a unabated optimist, and I think we can do this. And even if we end at the end of the world party, I want to be hanging out with people that were like, yeah, we gave it the best shot. I do not want to hang out with people who are like, I told you so. So even if it all goes pear-shaped, I know who I'm going to be hanging out with at the end of the world.
Go out swinging. Yeah, I know. It's the only way to go, I love that, Tane. Thank you. Jay, how about you? What's making you optimistic today?
Yeah, look, I think, I have a bit of a sunshine. I'm, sitting here at my home with my family. played with my son a little earlier, helped him with some homework. So I think, look, there is, I'm a glass half full guy, okay? So there's always two sides to everything, but I choose to see the glass being half full. It's the, if I were to sort of reflect on my past and, me being a paraplegic and, before my injury and during and in my recovery now towards trying to walk again and all of that, I think it's something to do with perhaps what I've seen, growing up with my family, my parents, my mom in particular. And I think there's this thing about the undying human spirit, right? No matter what happens, we could do this. The fact that, let's go back to Adam and Eve, or the very first man and woman, to today, all of us are here because they kept going. They never gave up. So I think the fact that we are here means that, and the fact that we got kids that, it doesn't matter with our own kids or neighbors' kids or the kids that we see, the next generation is here, and they are looking at the world with wonder and awe, and you look up the skies and you see the stars. Man, this is an amazing universe that we are living in, and it could be multiverse, right? So just think of the possibilities. That's what makes me optimistic, really.
Oh, that's brilliant. I really love that, actually. So it leans into what Tana was saying as well about, things are going to get better and better. We've got to keep on improving. And, if we don't, we'll go out swinging. But in the meantime, there's lots to be hopeful and optimistic about, and for the next generation as well. So I love that. Jay, thank you for sharing. Jenny, my gorgeous Jenny, what is making you optimistic today?
Wow, being here, number one, is I just love this. I just love it. I love it when we bring together like-minded people and everyone's so passionate about making a positive impact on humanity. For me, what makes me optimistic is really kind of following on from Jay, is really the youth and the passion that they have. My son is 13, he's in year 8, and they're working on a humanities project at the moment, which is Purpose for Change. And they're allowed to do anything that they want. They've got to do a project, something that's going to make a positive impact. And I'm just in awe. I just cannot believe it. To me, we weren't having these conversations when I was at school. It was very much about the hole in the ozone layer, and that's what we were being taught. And Victor always says that for a lot of people, their knowledge of the world comes from their grade 4 teacher. I'd probably agree with that. But the youth of today are passionate. They're passionate about electric cars. They're passionate about carbon emissions. They're passionate about their role in changing the world. And I'm so optimistic. I feel that, we can only learn from them. I feel like there's more for us to learn from them than for them to learn from us. Excited about the future and us being able to together, cross-generationally, make a positive impact.
I love that. A lot of optimism there. Yeah. Victor, what do you think? Back to you.
You're asking me what makes me optimistic? Of course, I've written a 3-page essay on this. So for me, optimism doesn't change from day to day. I look back at my grandparents, and, my grandfather was executed by the KGB, my grandmother to the Gulag for 12 years. But in 1987, she was there in the freedom rallies. She joined hands with 1 million people across 3 countries to call for the end of the Soviet Union. And then in 1991, she was there to celebrate it and outlive communism. And my mum, who died last October, a refugee twice, a widow when I was a kid, in a refugee widow in a strange land, working 3 jobs. But, she worked to the age of 92, bringing joy to people through yoga. And as, at her last day, she said to me, no more important thing have you ever done, Victor, than ask people what makes them optimistic. And, last week I was door knocking a country town and just bringing joy to people by asking them what makes them optimistic. So for me, asking people what makes you optimistic makes me more optimistic every day. But I want to throw to Jenny, because we've got to get on to the task at hand. You know, how do we tone down the news, sound intelligent, and be able to transmit inspiring and positive news to others? So over to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Victor. When we were developing the Habits of the Optimist program, this was very, very evidently a really important habit that needed to be addressed. So how do people regulate their news intake? And, you know, traditionally news, when we talked about news, we talked about TV, we talked about radio, we talked about newspapers. Whereas when we talk about news today, it's wow, like really it's this information overload of stuff, some of which you can control the content of, and some of which you really can't control the content of. But it really impacts on your perception of reality. It impacts on definitely your biases that you turn up to life with, and it really impacts on your being. At the core, you know, we see optimism as a lens that you show up to life with. And when you're constantly bombarded by messages, some very positive and some not so positive, it really makes an impact. So for us, we believe very strongly the importance of regulating this and taking some control. Now, Tane, I'm going to go to you first. I think that this is a really great segue. You're from Future Crunch, and I'll get you to introduce yourself briefly. You're a scientist, you're amazing. Absolutely, the work that you're doing is very, very much aligned with what we're talking about here today. But you talk about this concept of the information diet. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I think it's a really different way of talking about this same concept.
Cool. Well, yeah, so I'm Tane Hunter. I'm born from a Tasmanian mom and a Kiwi parent, but as you can hear, I grew up in New Mexico. I fell in love with biology. I've been in love with biology since I can remember. I'm a cancer researcher and a data scientist, so I use code, artificial intelligence to scan through DNA, figure out what's causing cancer, what changes are causing cancer, and then help inform doctors to improve patient outcome. But back to your comment about the information diet. When I go into the news, I often put on sunglasses and sunscreen. You got to protect yourself. But anyway, with the information diet, the same way that we think about how we consume knowledge should be the same way that we think about how we consume food. What goes in comes out. If you're eating unhealthy things, it's going to make you feel terrible. If you're not working out, you're not doing exercise, you're not taking care of your health, then it's going to affect your outcome. Negative news has a seriously bad physical effect. Cortisol levels go up, heart rate goes up, and you get stress. And also the rational parts of your brain start to shut down when you're in flight or fight mode. So so the way I think about an information diet is you need your good whole grains, like books, potentially that you've written, Victor. I haven't read any of them, just to let you know. But like from Hans Rosling, you know, those are your whole grains, your meaty things, right? Then you also need greens, your leafy greens as well. So that can be like podcasts or newsletters. You've got to sprinkle some nuts on there. That can be, bits of information that you get from social media. And ultimately, this is going to dictate your mental health and also your physical health. So thinking about the way you consume knowledge as information. Sure, have a day where there's nothing better than eating a pint of ice cream, at 12 o'clock while you're Netflixing and chilling in lockdown. But you need to know when you're going into junk food land, right? Like, I can't open a bag of chips without finishing it. That is just, once I pop, I can't stop. But we need to be conscious of that, especially the way we're consuming knowledge. If you're getting junk food knowledge, then know that you're having a break. And also with news that comes at us 24/7, it's really important to understand what's the context and who are the people that are giving it to you. What are they getting it? What are they getting from it? Because often, if you're getting free information, you're the product, right? And I think it's really important, especially tuning your information diet, to understand that Facebook, Twitter, all the social media apps, right? It's the way I think about it is like a pet. You're tuning an algorithm to give you what they want. And so every time you click on something negative, or if you click on something positive, it's going to give you more of the same thing. So I originally deleted my Twitter account and then restacked it with 10 people from every continent, every major country, gender diverse, even LGBTIQ, QIA+, and comics left, right, and then you balance that information, that news source. So like big people who are doing incredible things, like influencers, but on all sides of the spectrum, and that totally changes your worldview and the way you consume information. I'm gonna stop now because it's still grinding on the roof, and I'm very sorry.
Thank you, Tane. Well, I love that concept. I love the concept of an information diet. And I put in a link in the chat, which I would really highly recommend everyone goes and has a look at to explore that. Because, ultimately, otherwise, we're kind of the product of the news. You switch it on when your alarm goes off in the morning. You have it on, especially when we're all working from home. It's so accessible and easy for us for it to land. On your phone, you're constantly getting updates if you've got an Apple phone of Apple News. It's just there everywhere. So we often talk about, the importance of actually being conscious of it. That's the first step. The first step is being conscious of your consumption of the news, and then from there choosing, well, where am I going to get the news from? So Tane, that I think, the visuals in my mind of the information diet really makes it very, very easy to start thinking about. Jay, over to you. Now, Jay, we love having you here. You were one of our amazing narrators on the habit of regulating your news intake, and we'll put a link to your animation in the chat shortly. Do you want to share a little bit with us about your perspective on this topic?
Yeah, thank you. Look, the news intake, when we talk about news intake, it's just not about the news, as you mentioned. We're not talking about the 6 o'clock news or anything like that. It's about information that's coming to you from all directions. Now, we can see that the world has already changed in recognizing the impact of digital devices, the time we spend on those. So if you're an Apple user, you can see that there is screen time and those sort of things are coming in as part of the product to tell you how much time you were spending on these apps and which times, and time of the day and night and all that. And they're talking about the impacts of digital devices, the ultra, whatever, the white lights and rays and all of that. It's the same way that I think that if you are, say, for example, glued to the Facebook. So I remember I did a lot of Facebook consumption when I was at rehab back in 2015-16. And that's because I was alone and I just felt like I needed to surround myself with something. And again, I'm talking 5-6 years ago, it was slightly different. But now that knowing what I know about Facebook and others, and I'm thinking, wow, I was actually probably living in an echo chamber, maybe, I just don't know what the algorithms were doing 5 years back, right? But I came to know about Elon Musk in 2015 or 16 when I was at the rehab, because I watched a Facebook video. I thought he was some, British guy. Then I did some research. Oh man, so he's like South African in America doing this thing. And I was like, wow. And I predicted at the time that, he was going to be the first trillionaire in the world. This is amazing, blah, blah, blah. So I should thank Facebook for some of those things, that it did introduce me to certain things. So I'm not saying that news is all bad, but you got to have the variety, as Tanik was talking about. That diet has to be a balanced diet. So how do we regulate this? And the way I do that is that I'm very conscious about, after all these years of learning and failing and making mistakes. So I'm not saying that I just born with this knowledge. I learned it the hard way. I actually uninstall all of the apps that I was used to, or let's say addicted to. And then I only go to those sort of apps when I need to. So for example, I know that we are in a lockdown. So I'm not going to look at the lockdown data until Wednesday, because I know that's when the announcements are going to come. And then I go to the Age News website, or I go to, some very well-known sources of truth that I trust and are very, very reputed news sources. And then I do some searches on Google, or I then go, because, WhatsApp, people are sending me this sort of, this brewery has launched a beer, I guess in the name of Daniel Andrews, you know what I mean? All these sort of fun things, and a lot of those different pieces of information coming. Some you can take it as a break, take it as something that I can use to sort of amuse myself or to share. But we can also be careful about what we're sharing. So do not share things that you might find amusing or fun, or maybe you might think is credible, and you pass it on without checking. And what happened is, people that trust me are going to trust that news item as God's word. Whereas I just read it, I just had a giggle and I just passed on. So I could be very careful of not spreading rumors or unvalidated information. So this is why, I'm just keep going back to Age, but because that's the website I use. But you got to go to the reputed sources and make sure that what you're passing, the information that you're passing is valid. Because what happens is, news sources will talk about, it's likely that the lockdown is going to be extended. It's likely that the regional areas are going to be, the lockdown will be lifted. Or they will say, they locked down the whole country so that they can lift something. And then, so all these sort of rumors and point of views, because you can have anyone giving you any kind of statistic, any kind of point of view. Everybody has an opinion, right? So it's an opinion. It's not the real facts. So this is what, I think, Tana, you were talking about, using data, and, there's a lot of work to really look at what's real. Because if you look at technology, you got deep fakes. You can have videos of Daniel Andrews saying something that Daniel Andrews never said, right? So we got to really be careful about making sure that we're getting the information from the authoritative sources, and you got to know by working with this, what we got, to find out what is the real source of truth. So source of truth is the big thing for me, in terms of finding the right news and limiting that news. So I don't go to that every day or every minute. I go at the, when I need that information, I go. And of course, we got the emergency app installed. So if Victoria, if there's an emergency, SCS will tell us. So then we'll go to, ABC News. So we got a bit of a process to make sure that, we're not stuck when there is a storm or a flood or an earthquake, right? So you got to have that basic plan covered. But
very well said. Yeah, very, very well said, Jay. Rod, I completely agree with you. I think you both have given us very interesting perspectives on this topic. Now, when we talk about news intake, the I suppose contentious one, the biggie that we talk about, is really the media. And we talk about, the news as we historically call it. Barry, can we ask you, you've spent 35 years in the media, making the news. Can you give us your insights and your thoughts on, how people should really think about regulating their news intake?
I just put a thing out. When the word could is used in a news story, be very suspect of that particular story. So the word could is, to me, that shows a red flag up straight away for me. Also, when I was doing news for 20 years, I was in charge of all the communications out of the area between sort of Thailand and Tahiti for the BBC. So I used to arrange all the satellite transmissions and do the stories and things like that. That was just before the 24-hour news cycle really happened. So the 24-hour news cycle changed news dramatically, where the stories were a lot more researched. When the 24-hour news cycle happened, there was a whole rush to get lots and lots of stories out. So a lot of stories weren't checked.
Also, the other problem that I've seen in the last sort of 20 years is the demise of really good journalism. Journalists going out there and doing good investigating journalists, because a lot of the news channels got into trouble, and newspapers and things like that. So they cut staff and they cut a lot of really good journalists out. So that impacted. So the people I used to work with, I probably worked with some of the best journalists in the world for a number of years, and they would double check facts. They were very factual in the stories, particularly when you're working with the royal family and stories like that. So I ended up doing a lot of really big stories in terms of I think I covered 8 royal tours. I also traveled with Maggie Thatcher before she was elected, and so I had a lot of really interesting experiences. But I just find news today is not based on a lot of factual side. So the way I look at it, I discount it by 50%, and then I might throw in another 25% on that. I also have one of my staff spending probably 20 hours a week researching what I want to know, so I don't have to sit there and research it. So I get a lot of information broadly across the world of the topics that I want to know, and then I can form my own opinion on that. At the moment, what I see is a very one-sided stuff coming out. And the reason for that is that a lot of the journalists now sort of rip and read, where they are getting back to that research that doesn't go in anymore. So you're getting things that are very one-sided nowadays, and to get that balance, you have to go and search for it. So that's my view of where we're at in the news at the moment. But the 24-hour news cycle did change things dramatically.
Thanks, Barry. And yeah, I hadn't actually thought about that, but I can't even imagine the volumes that they have to create on a regular basis, constantly. And, I think that really, creates quite an exciting message, because for all of us here, including us, Noreen, Victor, who have organisations, Jay and Tane, I think it creates a wonderful opportunity to actually create stories that the media want to talk about, because they're desperately searching, and so either they can create rubbish that isn't so well researched, or we can provide them with stuff. So I think it creates opportunities. Barry, love your thoughts.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm really into good stories. I've always been into good stories. That's lacking in our system nowadays, particularly if you look at the amount of fake programs on TV now with the reality shows. Reality shows, to me, don't do anything for society. So documentaries, for instance, are a really good fundamental thing to do, but it's very hard to get documentaries funded nowadays. But documentaries give a point of view. They also give you knowledge. So I just think we're really down very low on the knowledge level nowadays. I mean, if you look at the reality shows that go on, a lot of people believe they're real. And that's a real problem to me, They're highly scripted. I know a lot of people that work on these programs, and they are just highly produced and highly scripted. And for people to believe that they're real, to me, is a real problem.
Thank you. Victor, can you just jump yourself back on? I know you've done a lot of looking into the figures of the as when Tane's talking about data, the percentages of good news versus bad news internationally. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so one of the book, The Enlightenment by Steven Pinker, the head of psychology at Harvard, actually mapped it with a number of his students, researchers and collaborators, including Bill Gates and others. And so I'm 62. So when I was at university in the late 70s, early 80s, the news was roughly 50-50 good, bad. And as Barry would be able to tell us, you had to have tape, and the camera crews would go out, and people doing a press release or a launch had a good chance of getting it covered on the news, because there just wasn't enough bad stuff going on in Melbourne or Sydney or Guatemala. Now, of course, with the 24-hour news cycle, agencies providing very low-cost content, it's up to something between 90 and 95% of news stories are negative. And I will confess that I wrote to the chairman of the ABC, the previous chairman, and said that I believe the ABC is in breach of its charter because it misrepresents Australia. Not left or right, but pessimistic. And he actually wrote back and said, actually, you make a good point, and kicked it across to an old friend of mine who was then the editor. And he, to his credit, he then looked at a week's news stories on ABC radio. And in that week, 95% of the stories were negative. And in fact, all of the other stories were ambiguous. So not even positive. So if you listen to the news, and Rosling and others would say the reason is that mammalian instinct, to have a look at something that's dangerous. So we can't blame them for doing it. It's a natural instinct. People are consuming it. But it has gone from when I was young at roughly 50-50 to nearly 95%. And when Tane talks about a healthy diet, you've got to use other stuff. And look, what's funny is, people talk about the negativity of social media, but because I'm such a positive person, my Twitter very rarely shows negative stories. My Facebook has lots of positive stories. My LinkedIn generally has people achieving things. And of course, every day I share stories. So the key to this is, the leader looks like the person in my mirror. If you see a good story or hear a good story, share it. And some people on this call, I think of Stephen Manilak and his Indian audience. His audience is bigger than the Age newspaper. His audience is bigger than the Herald Sun. If he shares a positive story, 100,000 people might read it.
Love that, Victor. Love it. And I think we all have a role to play, definitely. If we can flood social media with good news stories, I know, Tane, it's something that you're very passionate about. If we can flood these platforms, which is a really, really big part of where people are now getting their news from, it really makes a big impact. Paul, you've made some really interesting comments in the chat, and I know that this is a topic that you're very passionate about. Can you share your thoughts on this topic with us?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for a highly informative discussion. I'd probably remind us actually what we're doing now is media. And so we're in the middle of a very optimistic media discussion. Can I just share some kind of, I'm a former journalist, by the way. I was editor of The Age up until 2012. And so can I just share a couple of the things that I think about on this issue? The first is that the world of media has been now for some time in a sort of a spiral, a washing machine effect of aggregation. So technology and the rapid availability of information has meant that whether it was a newspaper company or a TV company or whoever, they aggregate content. And so to Barry's point earlier, there's been a dramatic loss of quality, a dramatic sort of quick turnaround of information requiring us to be very careful. So the first word is aggregation. The second word is filter. So one of the challenges we face is that we have to be, if you think of an old kind of coffee machine with that paper filter, we have to be the filter. We have to take care, we have to choose wisely. And then this is often described in a range of books as the push and pull factor. So news organizations are pushing stuff at us constantly. And in fact, annoyingly, you have to actually turn off all of the beeps and everything on all of your devices, start managing it right. So our role is to pull the content we want, not to accept the push. A lot of the content that's pushed is, and it was mentioned earlier, I think by Tane, that it's products, they're products. So people in media say, let's do some products on 35-year-old women who live in middle socioeconomic suburbs of Melbourne. And it's deliberately targeted at that audience. So be careful, again, what you decide to pull towards you. Can I just, with that very brief sort of summary, just touch on one other aspect, which is there's been a real a sort of merging of what commentary is and what reporting is, and to the great loss of quality within the media industry globally. So far too often now, perhaps an inexperienced reporter will be supposedly reporting, but will drop commentary in it. And to that kind of wise view of Barry a bit earlier about the word could, it's the starting point for having a radar to go, hang on, is this reporting or is it commentary? And sorry, I've probably got a bit of a couple of little things to say here, but the other one is just watch social media. I'm personally appalled at the number of professional journalists who comment on social media about their own reporting. I just don't think it's right. I think it kind of really clouds the whole issue. Are they independent? Are they apolitical or not? And we're seeing a laziness by professional journalists using social media in a different way. Shocking, not good. Let's put our radar up. And you know what, to finish optimistically, when we're gathering our information and determining the type of knowledge we want, that's so optimistic because we have so many tools right in front of us to do that. And maybe if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share privately how I determine my own diet. And I've learned something here today. I'm going to rebuild my Twitter account. So thank you very much.
That. Thank you, Paul. Such a wealth of information. Noreen, I'm going to bring you up. I'd love you to add your 2 cents here on your take on this, because I know that you are incredibly passionate about world politics and local politics and what's going on. Yes, you are. I'd love you to share your thoughts about this whole concept of regulating news intake.
Oh, look, I think it's been echoed in different ways by everyone today. We have the control, we have the power. We're not powerless. We're really not. And you know what? I mean, it's a bit like what Tane was saying about the more junk food you eat, the worse you feel. So I just think I want to reiterate that. I'm not a natural optimist myself. I'm optimistic for everyone else, but not for myself. But I'm learning through all this work that we're doing and support from everyone here to be more optimistic. And I've got to say, by doing things to make me brighter and lighter and more optimistic, it works. And it's the same for the news and for the media. So I just check in the morning, check in the evening, make sure we're all alive, make sure I'm alive, and then I get on with my day. And I look for things that kind of are interesting, not always joyful. I mean, just interesting. Things that interest me, things that make me feel creative, things that that are good to do in a day. So I just think we have so much more control than we know. We really do. Stop and think. You have the control.
I love that. I really, really love that. Because I think, so many people just have it on there all the time from all these different places. And it kind of does make people feel really like they can't control what's coming in. And, there's so much work being done out in the field around mindset and the role of mindset in your life and your outcomes. And I think this all kind of comes together and really fits beautifully into helping us all practice those habits of optimism and really live a life with that optimistic lens. Victor, I'm going to pass over to you. I'm hoping you've got the breakouts ready to rock and roll. And we'd like to open and give you about 8 minutes to have a chat about what is it that you've taken away from this session and how do you go about regulating your news intake to help you stay optimistic.
We then spent 8 minutes in interesting breakout groups.
We'd love a few comments from people from the groups. I was lucky to be in a group with Jay, actually, and everyone in our group was very much aligned in that they try to very much limit their news intake, and whether they watch it or not really makes no difference to their life. So that was kind of our summary of us. Is there anyone who does want to jump on? Tane, how was your discussion in your group?
Oh, I mean, great. I was on with Paul, and I want to reiterate Paul's point when he said it's about information coming towards you. Like you are bringing it towards you. And as Jay said earlier too, Facebook can be an incredible tool. So be a vector not to spread the fear virus, right? Because you're a vector of infection. You can stop it, you can vaccinate yourself against bad news, and then you can be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And also to reiterate Barry's point, like could is a dangerous word in a headline, especially because I'm a science nerd. If something is reported as they could be doing this in the future world, that's charlatanism. I know I'm from Future Crunch, but I'm not a futurist. A wise person once told me those that live by the crystal ball die by eating glass. And it's really important to understand, especially with the mainstream media, that as Victor was saying before, it is 95% positive and then a bunch of negative, and then the rest is either on the fence or just clickbait, like a fireman saved a cat from a tree. But tune your information diet, tune your narrative nosh to knowledge and information that feeds you rather than takes away. And the same way we think about exercise, the same way we think about diet, use it as a tool to make you healthier, feel better, go for a faster mile, and do better in the Olympics, but in the Olympics of knowledge rather than
I love
just
that.
pure athletics.
I love that, Tana. I really, really do. And I think, I just watch my 13-year-old and how they go about getting news intake, and some of the ways I will not share because they're not fantastic, but let me share a good one. So my 13-year-old's really obsessed with engineering and space and technology and all this stuff, and because of that, YouTube is an amazing source of information, and because all of the content he's watching is about that, he's fed content about that. And YouTube has this little section which are shorts, and he just scrolls through these shorts, and because everything he looks for is on those topics, it's just totally curated for him. So I think there are so many ways, and it's amazing some of the tools that people have put in the chat. Thank you all so much. So if you can keep putting those in there, that would be absolutely brilliant. Jay, Tane, could not be more grateful having you guys on. Barry, Paul, thank you for jumping up and helping us. Victor, it is time for a good laugh, because no session of ours is without one. Noreen's already started.
Yeah, I'm at the idea of it.
Noreen, you do the count to 3, and we are all going to watch each other and laugh for 30 seconds, and you're going to do the timing, Noreen.
Okay, right. 1, 2, 3, laugh!
Oh God, you can see I have turned red and my ribs are hurting. But Tane, Jay and Jenny, you have led us in this rich conversation. We've all left happy, we've all left laughing. For those of you who were with us on Monday, with Ros Ben Moshe, who is the world expert on laughing for well-being, and she is my muse on laughter. She's actually agreed to come back on Monday after work. So those of you who are in Australian time zone, 5 o'clock Melbourne time, 3 o'clock Perth time, 7 o'clock New Zealand time, 3 o'clock in the morning for you guys in the United States. So you might have to just, in fact, we might do we'll do another session American time zone. So I've had a few of those requests, but absolutely fantastic. Look, we'll close formally because we always do this over lunch for 1 hour, but leave it open. And we often call this wild mic, anyone who wants to talk, anyone who's got something to add or say, please do that. So thank you so much. My friend Caroline Ward is here, and she led our magnificent series, The Optimist Heart, last year. and with a couple of episodes this year. And she always said, the important thing is the co-creation. You know, people often ask, oh, can I watch the video of X or the video of Y? And I say, yeah, you can, but if you weren't there, you didn't feel it. So thank you so much for everyone making this happen, particularly in the groups and the chat. Well, we hope you really enjoyed that episode of the Habits of an Optimist, and we'd love you to get involved. You can join the Centre for Optimism and get involved in our activities, or just Google Habits of an Optimist. It's a 50-minute animated course. Well, it takes between 50 minutes and a lifetime, but you'll love it and you'll enjoy it. Thanks a lot and have a great day.